Welcome to The Juggle is Real. I'm Andryanna, and today's episode is a deep, compassionate dive into two topics that I feel impact so many of us. We're talking anxiety and assertiveness and how they're more connected than we might think. And I'm joined by the brilliant Dr. Kristine Laderoute, who is a clinical psychologist and lifelong proponent of mental wellness. With over 15 years of experience, Dr. Laderoute brings a grounded, practical approach to helping people with a broad range of mental health concerns using her very diverse skill set. She completed her doctoral degree in clinical psychology at York University and underwent training in various clinical settings, including the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, Toronto General Hospital, North York General Hospital, and private practices. In both her own private practice and in her role at Loom Women Plus Health, she is driven by a desire to help people improve their lives through self-connection. She's especially passionate about creating space for women to feel seen, heard, and freed up from emotional burden, as well as helping them to create space for themselves. In this conversation, we explore why anxiety is not something to fix, but rather something to better understand, and how we've been socialized out of healthy emotional expression. We talk about the role that our nervous system plays in both our anxiety and our relationships. And we get into what assertiveness really means and how we can transform how we communicate. We talk about how to overcome people pleasing and that low self worth, and how sometimes this can disrupt our relationships, but how to really stay strong through it all. And Dr. Laderoute also has some tools for us for our emotional recovery when we are in the midst and right in the middle of our own real life juggle. If you've ever felt like anxiety is loud and it's louder than your inner voice, or if you've struggled to speak up for your needs, this episode is a must listen. So let's dive right in. This is the Juggle is Real podcast. I hope you feel seen, that you realize your worth, lighten your load, and prioritize your own needs. As we hear from leading experts and well-known faces in the wellness, entrepreneurship, education, and motherhood space, I hope you gain insights, proven practices, and learn actionable tools to help you enjoy the juggle of work, family, and everything in between with a little less stress and a lot more ease, joy, and fun. Most of all, I hope you find what you need to simplify, streamline, and supercharge your own journey of better balance and self-love. Are you with me? Let's get started. Dr. Kristine Laderoute, welcome to The Juggle is Real. I'm really thrilled that we can have this conversation. I think it's something that is affecting so many of us and something that we can all be supported in, whether it's for ourselves, for our family members, people that we know, and just have a better understanding and better awareness of anxiety and how we can be more assertive and that art. I love the word, the art of how we can tap into that emotional recovery. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I have a lot of questions. There's a lot that we want to
Yeah.
get into, and we've learned a little bit about you and just your vast knowledge and the insight you have on a professional level. But can you share a little bit about yourself on a personal level, a little bit more about you and the things that you enjoy and the things that you're doing that really light you up?
Sure. I've never been asked that because as a psychologist, we don't really like talk about ourselves. Yeah, I think so I'm a mom. I have two kids who light me up, a son and a daughter. And I have been doing this work for over 15 years now. Which has been interesting in its evolution over the course of COVID, and kind of switching from in person to virtual. And now, most recently, I've been getting into a new endeavor with Loom Women Plus Health, which is a new private women's health clinic in Toronto. And I am really proud and grateful to be the clinical psychologist there. So we're a startup, and I'm in the process of helping them create mental health programming for the clinic. So that's kind of those are some of the things that are lighting me up right now.
Loom is lighting me up too, I have to say. And Well, I did have a conversation with Dr. Sarah Naomi Shaw on the podcast. And for
Right.
the listener, if you want to go back and listen to that, it was navigating midlife and looking at perimenopause and the juggle. And it was such an enlightening conversation. She was so helpful. And we did talk about Loom a little bit, but just for someone who might not be aware, what is Loom and what is it that you and your partners and those that you are working with are trying to do?
Yeah, so Loom is a health clinic for women, um, specializing in midlife healthcare, but we also see like a little bit of a range, age range. But what Loom is trying to do is really revolutionize healthcare for women. So to provide care where women are not just a number, they're not, we're taking more time to really help them feel seen and heard, and optimize their well-being. So um, it's really a different approach. It's a preventative healthcare approach. So where, most healthcare that we receive in Ontario through the Ministry of Health is often reactionary, right? Loom is trying to get ahead of the curve and look, and so instead of, preventing you from having a heart attack in 10 years. They're trying to do things now that would prevent you from having a heart attack in 20 years. So it's really about changing the landscape of healthcare for women, by spending more time, more care, and taking that preventative lens.
Which is so great. And Loom,
Hmm.
you have an office in Toronto, Ontario, in
Yes.
Canada. But you are doing so much. And I know Dr. Shaw was saying, just in terms of making women aware through social media, through a lot of the practices that you're doing to support women, not only in the clinic, not only where you're being seen in person, but also trying to support legislation throughout Canada and ways that
Yes.
women can be supported, which is so incredible. And
Yes.
oftentimes when we look at our health, we are looking at, the medications we're taking, or we're looking at our diet, or we're looking at our exercise. And this mental health component is such a huge piece of the puzzle that often gets overlooked. And
Yeah.
even just today, before we actually hit record on this conversation, I mean, I was feeling some anxiety myself. We had a little bit of recording issues. There's a
Yeah.
little bit of
Me
back and
too.
forth, and exactly. And so it's like these things come up, and I'm so grateful that you're here, but I want this conversation to be supportive. And so when we couldn't get the audio working properly, that was like mustering up some anxiety for me. So to begin this conversation, can you support us by helping us understand anxiety a little bit, more than maybe what we might know? Because you talk about anxiety as something that's not really to quote unquote fix, but it's really our body's natural alarm system. So, can you elaborate on this perspective? Can you explain how reframing anxiety in this way can be more empowering for people as not just something that's quote unquote wrong with us?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you started with our actual example of having trouble with the audio, because I was feeling anxiety too. And in this example, yeah, like my body's alarm system is going off. Like, okay, you're supposed to be doing this podcast, and she can't hear you. So what are we going to do? Um, but even in that moment, I'm trying to apply some of the things that I'll talk about, which is that, what, like, this is not an emergency. Like, this is okay. Like, the more I kind of calm my nervous system, I'm going to be able to figure this out, which we did. But yeah, and, so in terms of anxiety being seen as not necessarily something wrong with us, but more our body's natural alarm system. It's a bit tricky because, anxiety is uncomfortable. People want to fix it. They don't want to feel anxious. I get it. I've also suffered from anxiety. So when I'm saying it's not just something to fix, I don't mean it in this kind of dismissive way of, oh, don't worry, just go with it. I get it, right? The symptoms are uncomfortable. Yeah, we want to be able to manage them. But if we're only managing anxiety symptoms, then we're only managing anxiety symptoms, kind of forever. So the way that I work with anxiety is that I really want to get to the bottom of it and understand what's driving it. And so when we're feeling anxious, sometimes it's in relation to something that's actually occurring, like in our case, right? It's like, oh, this is actually a problem. If we don't have our audio, it's going to be hard to do this podcast. But sometimes anxiety is coming up often, a lot of the time, in relation to things that we're not really sure why we're anxious, and that's the kind of anxiety where I think it can be really helpful to try to be a bit curious about, which is really hard to do in the moment when you're anxious. So it's okay if you can't do it in the moment. Um, but maybe even after the fact, as something's resolved, like, huh, okay, what's my body maybe trying to tell me there? Like, my nervous system is kind of firing, telling me that something is off. Is it what I just thought it was, or is there more going on? Like, if it keeps happening in many different situations, is there something else going on?
Right. So it's our body's natural alarm system and response. And it can feel like what you talk about as the main event. So, like, this is the
Yeah,
problem, is my anxiety. But
yeah.
it's actually a sideshow, which can distract us from a deeper, unresolved emotional something or other. Right. So, can you discuss this? Like, you often talk about an analogy with an iceberg. So is anxiety just the tip of the iceberg? Is that sort of how we can relate to it? Talk to us about this a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. So the way that I've come to understand anxiety and work with anxiety, both personally and professionally, is that there's anxiety can often serve as what I would call an inhibitory emotion, or what I'm drawing from AEDP, which is Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy. It's an acronym for that, which sees anxiety as an inhibitory emotion. So it kind of comes in and it's signaling that there's something else there. So if we think of an iceberg, the bigger part of the iceberg is not visible, right? It's under the water. The part that's visible is a smaller part above the waterline. And so when anxiety shows up, it's kind of like that's what we see, but we're not aware of what's under the iceberg. We just think that's it, right? Or if you think of like a concert where there's a main stage and then there's kind of little stages, side stages, more embedded in the crowd. Anxiety wants you to think it's the main stage and look over here, but usually anxiety is kind of the side stage, and it's distracting us from, or it thinks it's trying to protect us. It's our mind trying to protect us from something bigger. So going back to the iceberg, the idea is that, so to kind of understand what I'm talking about, you have to believe in that there's an unconscious part of our mind. So I'll always tell patients this, like, if you want to work with me and for it to make sense, you kind of have to believe in that. So there's evidence of the unconscious part of our mind in everyday life. So if you've ever been, driving your car and you end up at a red light, but you're like, oh, I'm not really even sure how I got here. I'm just suddenly stopped at this red light. That's kind of an example of, you've been in your unconscious mind somewhere, but your conscious mind has been driving. So the unconscious part of our mind is where painful things go. And you got to think about, we're talking as adults right now, but we've had a whole life getting up to this point where our mind has been in different stages of development. And, it's the most developed right now, but when we were younger, it was still in development. And so stuff that was really painful that we weren't in a position to deal with, our minds couldn't process, or we didn't have the support to deal with, kind of got shoved under the waterline into our unconscious. Um, and we stayed conscious of what was maybe a more tolerable part. And so anxiety now often shows up, in my experience, where it's kind of signaling that something's uncomfortable, like something here is stirring the pot, like it's stirring that stuff under the waterline, but I don't really have conscious access to that stuff. So I don't really know, I don't know that. All I know is I'm anxious, but I don't necessarily know why I'm anxious, or like I'm thinking maybe I shouldn't be anxious, or I'm noticing I'm kind of anxious a lot. So that's where I usually work with people to understand, okay, what's your anxiety focused on? And is there something else? Like, what might be under the waterline? What might be some of the, what we would call suppressed emotions? That are kind of getting stirred up. And so almost the anxiety can be seen as your body's natural alarm system, that there's something uncomfortable there, and like take a look. So that's what I'm saying. If we just want to fix it, right? If we're just like, anxiety is the problem and we just want to fix it, we might be missing the bigger picture of what's the unresolved pain underneath that could actually resolve the anxiety, as opposed to just band-aid the symptoms.
This is so good. And I mean, it makes me think of, something that you talk about, which is pain versus suffering.
Yeah.
And I guess if we can understand this more, we might be able to address the root cause of our anxiety a bit better. Can you speak to us about pain versus suffering?
Yeah. So I I talk to people about anxiety as suffering that is masking a deeper emotional pain. So again, if you think of like anxiety as inhibiting something else, what might have been more painful at whatever point in our life might have been, I don't know, something that's really sad, something that's heartbreaking, something that's like disappointment, hurt, anger, or things that, we weren't allowed to feel because we didn't have supportive people to allow us to feel those things, or to help us to process those things. So our mind kind of, has learned, okay, that's painful. It's too much right now. Let's keep it under the water. But we kind of stay in this suffering. So anxiety, if you think about a more general form of anxiety, it's often presents in the form of worry, right? So it's like, what if this, what if that, what if this, what if that? And there's never an answer to the what ifs. Or if there is an answer, there'll be another what if that comes with that answer, right? So if it's like, what if I left my stove on? Okay, well, maybe my solution is I'm going to ask my neighbor who has my key to go in and check my stove. But then that, if somebody's prone to this kind of anxiety, will lead to like, well, now, okay, but what if they didn't lock the door? What if they, I don't know, did something in my yeah, so there's often like a perpetual, I call it a hamster wheel of what ifs, like that people kind of never get off. So anxiety kind of, it's almost like this like gray cloud kind of hanging over your head where it kind of moves with you, right? You go over here and it follows you. You go over here, it follows you. So you're kind of in this suffering as opposed to if you can get into the pain that's underneath it, more like, let's say, a more core emotion like sadness, there's usually a place to place that. So there's usually somewhere to say, oh, right, I'm sad because this happened, or this person said this, or some, I don't know, I didn't get this. And even though that might feel counterintuitive to be like, oh, but now I'm really in pain, the idea is that when you get to underlying emotions and you deal with them, there's usually a place to put them, like there's something that they're about, and then you can process them. And when they come up, you're going to feel them. It's going to be uncomfortable, but they're going to dissipate. So that's how emotions work. We actually have to feel them for them to go away. But when our mind has been so used to blocking them and thinking that it's safer for us not to feel them, we stay in this suffering because there's always this thing under the water that's kind of there that we carry with us, if that makes any sense. So I would call it like unresolved emotional pain. Um, and so our mind is kind of distracting us, right? Like, well, look over here, look over here, look over here. But we're kind of now always looking over here. We're always on the hamster wheel. I don't know if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate what you're talking about when it comes to many of us are just afraid of our emotions in general,
Yeah,
afraid to feel.
yeah,
But
yeah,
there is that dissipation. And you touched upon how, as children, babies are just, they can express their emotions pretty openly. Toddlers,
yeah,
something can be the end of the world if they don't get the right color of, popsicle or something, right? But
yeah,
um, over time, we've sort of been socialized out of naturally feeling or expressing our emotions. Can you talk to us
yeah.
about this and how suppressing it? I mean, you've kind of touched upon it already, but the suppression really does contribute to our anxiety in adulthood. So then, what are the steps that we can take to then reconnect with this emotional response to be like, okay, ask ourselves a question. Maybe you find yourself in the hamster wheel or you're doing the what ifs, or you find yourself really anxious during certain times or periods or with certain people or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How can we actually then go a little bit deeper to
Mhm.
figure out and actually get to that emotional reconnection?
Sure. Yeah, I love giving people this example of the toddlers because I think it captures it pretty well. So, and anybody who's ever been a parent of a toddler or been around a toddler, um, they are kind of a good example of just kind of natural emotional, expression and kind of processing and resolution, basically, where, things come up, like kind of like your example of like, okay, I want that popsicle. And in their mind, their little like toddler mind, which is still developing, it's like that's what they want. Like they want it so much. And if we're trying to be responsible parents and like, oh no, but like it's close to dinner. Here's all these reasons why you can't have it. They don't care. Like they don't understand that. They just know I really want that popsicle and you're not giving it to me. And so they appropriately for their age, right, feel an emotion. Maybe it's anger, right? Maybe it's sadness, but whatever it is, it kind of takes over their body. And if you've ever seen a toddler where they're just like, I'm stomping, I'm throwing myself on the floor, like I'm kicking and screaming, if you can think about it in these emotion terms, it's like that emotion, they feel it in their body and they don't like it. It's not comfortable. And so they're going to express it, right? And they're going to like let it out and they're going to like kick and scream and the emotion comes up, they feel it, they're fully in it, and then they get it out. And then what happens with every toddler after they have a meltdown? They're totally fine
Yeah.
after that, right? You could ask them anything. Can you do this? Okay.
Hmm.
Like they're kind of totally back to normal for the most part after that's done, right? So that's kind of a pure natural example of an emotion came up, they felt it, they didn't feel anything else about it. They didn't feel like I shouldn't feel angry because it's before dinner. Like they're a toddler, they don't care, they don't know that. So the emotion came up, they fully felt it, they released the emotional energy of it, and then they were recovered, basically, right? So the emotion came up, they felt it, it dissipated. And as older kids and teens and adults, we get socialized out of that, right? It's like, oh, like that's you can't do that. Like, why are you mad? And I'm going to shame you for being mad, or I'm going to tell you that that's ridiculous, right? Like, no, like you should just know better. Or, we don't show our emotions, whatever kind of depends on the family you grew up in. But in general, regardless of family, society doesn't really tolerate adults
Hmm.
doing that, right? But it doesn't mean that as adults, we don't feel these things. It doesn't mean that as adults, we don't feel like, somebody upsets us and maybe we want to rip their heads off. We're not going to do that, but we might still feel the intensity of the emotion, but we've learned to kind of keep it under the water. Um, so I think your other question was like, how do we reconnect with that?
Yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
I'm not saying how do we just take a meltdown and yell and scream and kick around on the
Yeah.
floor, but I think,
Yeah.
yeah, we can probably process the emotion better instead of trying to mask it, and then it bubbles up and it causes us to feel anxiety later on.
Exactly. And, don't get me wrong, like I'm also not saying that we as adults should just throw ourselves on the ground and have a tantrum and have a
Yeah.
meltdown, right? I'm not advocating for that either. But, also because we are more capable than toddlers of our brains are more developed, we are more capable of emotion regulation than toddlers are. At the same time, when our emotions are always going under the water or getting suppressed, it's almost like we're overregulated. We're becoming overregulated in terms of emotions. So, where is the gray zone between, having a meltdown like a toddler and just being completely like, nope, I'm fine. I'm always fine. Nothing bothers me. And I just keep going. Um, so, I would say, in an adult situation where I don't know, something is upsetting to you, or maybe you don't notice the emotion. Maybe you notice more you feel anxious. That's where I'm saying anxiety is a little bit of your cue, like your natural alarm system, to be like, maybe you can't do it in the moment, but maybe after the fact, like, yeah, that was really uncomfortable. Like, what was going on for me there? Um, like, was I really hurt that my like partner said this, or was in the meeting, was that person like really disrespectful and that really pissed me off? Like, it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to go have a tantrum or you're going to go confront the person. That's totally separate. So I just want to distinguish here between reconnecting with what you feel. So feeling the emotion versus what do you do with it? I'm not talking
Mhm.
about what do you do with it? Do you go talk about it? What do you do? How do you express it? That's that's a separate part later, like a behavioral part. But just for your own self privately to be like, huh, yeah, I think I was pretty mad there. But I didn't, it wasn't appropriate for me to express it, or I feel ashamed about it, or I feel like I shouldn't be mad. It's almost taking a pause to be like, is there anything else here other than my anxiety? Is there any other emotion here that got triggered that I'm feeling like I can't sit with?
So true. And I think when we allow ourselves that ability to just come back to it and ask ourselves these questions, and whether it's just like a mental, ask and see what pops up, or maybe we'll journal about it, or maybe,
Yeah,
we're on a walk or in the shower, and we can actually, you know, allow ourselves to feel whatever that underlying emotion was. It supports us so much moving forward. But oftentimes our anxiety is triggering that fight or flight response, right? We're feeling
yeah,
like we're in danger. And you're saying like this suffering, this hamster wheel, we feel like we are, in danger, almost like there's like, the saber-toothed tiger is outside our
yeah,
door.
yeah,
Um, and it's putting us in a heightened nervous system state. So when there's no real danger, how can we understand this physiological response? And how can we manage our anxiety? I know we don't want to fix it, but when we're in these stressful situations, when maybe we aren't able to ask ourselves these questions, like what is underlying,
yeah,
how can we manage our anxiety in the moment?
yeah. So that's where like fixing can be useful, right? Like in terms of just managing the symptoms. And again, like I don't, right? I'm not saying we don't, we just want to suffer in the symptoms, right? Like we do kind of want to like fix the symptoms or like address them, respond to them. I'm just saying we don't want to leave it there necessarily, so that we're
Mm-hmm.
always in this like fixing mode, right? So what you're talking about now is the relationship right between anxiety and the nervous system, and yeah, so the nervous system when it comes online into fight or flight, like with your example of the saber-toothed tiger, um, and, when we're going into fight or flight mode, our mind is not really distinguishing, um, the situation. It's feeling like this is dangerous, and I need to fight or flee. And so that's where I think we can intervene a little bit to actually pause and make the distinction. Hold on, like, is there a saber-toothed tiger? Like, if there is, I really need to run and save myself, right? I really need to mobilize. So, but most times, in everyday life, where our nervous system is getting mobilized is not necessarily a life or death situation, right? So if we were in a burning building, our fight or flight response would kick in. The same as if we were in a stressful meeting, our fight or flight response would kick in, but our mind's not distinguishing, well, this is a meeting versus, this is a life or death situation. You need to run out of the building. And that's where we can try to be a little bit more conscious. So in both cases, our body, our nervous system is mobilizing to get us to run out of the burning building, right? So our heart rate is quickening, our breath is more shallow, we have cortisol, adrenaline running through our body. And if we were actually going to run, if it was really a burning building, that would really help us, and we would need all of that physiological mobilization. But if you're sitting in a stressful meeting, all of that is still happening. Your mind is still saying like run, but you're not. You're sitting in a meeting, and it's really uncomfortable to have all that physiological reactivity happening when you're just sitting still. And then that's where anxiety can also kick up in terms of feeling anxious about feeling anxious, right? Like it's almost like, oh, okay, now I physiologically also feel so uncomfortable, but I have to sit here, and now I feel anxious about like the anxiety response that I'm having. So one thing that I think can help is to distinguish, as you said, between like, is this uncomfortable or is this dangerous? Right? Anxiety symptoms, when they come up, they can feel dangerous, right? That's what like people having panic attacks often feel like they're having a heart attack. And so it can be scary. If you know that you're anxious, it's not dangerous, it's really uncomfortable. And so if you can kind of make that distinction in your mind, like, is this dangerous or is this uncomfortable? Okay, it's uncomfortable. This is a stressful meeting. It feels intense. I don't really want to be here. I am here. Okay, so, but it's not dangerous. Like, I'm safe for the most part, physically safe. And how can I now kind of like send signals to my nervous system that I don't need all this. I don't need all this physiological reactivity, right? So that's where you, even in a meeting, you could always engage breathing, slow your breathing, deepen your breathing, and kind of remind yourself, okay, this is uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous, just to prevent from the escalation of the nervous system to full on panic.
We know we should be doing these things to calm down, but in the moment, or you gave us the toddler tantrums. When we're the parent now and our toddler's having
Mhm.
the meltdown, like that
Yeah,
can make us feel really anxious, especially if you're like in the grocery store and there's a big lineup and
yeah,
it's like a big
yeah.
ordeal. Anything else that you can share with us when it comes to managing the symptoms of anxiety, how we can move forward, not getting caught up in the being anxious about our anxiety, in ways that maybe in the moment, or lifestyle things that we can do that are going to support us just leading our life every day.
Yeah, so like in that grocery store example, I think one of the things that contributes to our heightened anxiety there, like, it's stressful, right? It is stressful if your toddler's throwing themselves on the floor and you're in a lineup and there's a lot of people. Um, I think one of the things that often contributes to like stress heightening there is this feeling like of judgment, right? Oh my God, like, what are people thinking? Or judging yourself, right? Like, oh, what kind of parent am I? Like, I can't get my kid to just be quiet and like wait in the grocery line. And so um, a lot of times, if we can notice that idea of like, how much are we judging ourselves, or how much are we concerned that other people are judging us here, and try to get a bit of separation from that. Like, so separating ourselves from that judgment might look like, this moment in the grocery store is not a measure of my parenting, right? Like, this is not a label of me as a parent. This is like a moment in time. Toddlers do this, right? If people don't understand, like, let them, they don't understand. Right? I can't, it's not my job to make them understand right now. If they're judging me, well, I won't know it. um, like, can they? Like, what's the worst case scenario if they're judging me? Like, almost sometimes we get so caught up in this idea of, okay, but we have to, everybody has to fall in line and we have to behave in a certain way and it has to look okay. If we can get away from that, it's a little bit like, okay, this is uncomfortable. I wish my toddler wasn't throwing themselves on the floor. I'm really tired and I don't want to be dealing with this. But this is not necessarily like an anxious situation where, I need to pull this together and everybody's depending on me. This is just like, people are inconvenienced and so am I. And it sucks, but I don't need to kind of feel fearful about what does it say about me as a parent? What does it say about my kid? And just leave it at, this is a moment in time in my toddler's proper development. And I don't like it. And I can't wait for it to be over. There's a little bit of a difference there between going into anxiety. So one of the ideas about helping to mitigate anxiety can be removing the judgment. Um, the other one I said earlier is about being curious, about like, what's going on here. Like, maybe after you get out of that scenario, you're not going to do this in the moment when you're dealing with your toddler. Maybe, I don't know, a couple of days later, try to be curious. Like, yeah, I was so stressed in there, like, or I was so anxious. Was it because I was judging myself and my parenting abilities? So again, like, the curiosity over judgment can be helpful.
I think it's also helpful. And we do have some episodes that talk about the nervous system directly, and how we can signal safety,
Yeah.
and really allow ourselves to feel safe in our bodies, and just, come back to ourselves in the moment, which I think is a learned practice. It's not something that we're taught oftentimes. And through supports like what you're offering, I think when we can, in the moment, come back to ourselves, understand that we're safe, as well as dig a little bit deeper and, through supports like yourself or asking ourselves these questions, finding out what's underneath that suffering that we might be in with anxiety. Um, I think it's just so important, but not something that we're, trained to do or that we talk about very often.
Yeah, and I think like hopefully you can see in that example that you gave, like with the grocery store, that like it's no matter what, it's uncomfortable, right? I'm not saying it's not. I've been there. But hopefully you can see, or listeners can hear that your mind can make it more uncomfortable than it needs to be,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're like, okay, this is an uncomfortable moment, I don't like it. I wish my toddler would just fall in line because I just want to get out of here and go home. That's fine, right? But if you're like going into that whole judgment about how do I look as a parenting? Oh, I look incompetent. I look like I have no control of my kid. Oh, my kid looks like a brat. What are people thinking? Now you're adding more suffering. Like that doesn't need to be there. Like that whole piece that your mind is coming up with, like let's say in the example of judging yourself or worried about other people's judgment, that's extra suffering that doesn't need to be there. You could just be with the pain of like, this sucks, I don't like it. Right? Um, and that's kind of enough, right? That's like hard enough. But our mind often adds a layer of suffering when we add in judgment, and then that goes into anxiety. So the other thing, just as we're talking, I would think that can also be helpful is to apply self-compassion, which I think is something that I'm starting to talk more and more about with people that most of us don't understand and just have never learned to do. And it's this idea of even in that moment being like, wow, this is really hard for me right now. Like I'm really stuck in this grocery store with this kid and I like really can't get them to cooperate and everybody's looking at me like, okay, like I'm gonna take care of myself after this. Like as opposed to judging, it's like, yeah, this is a really hard moment. Of course it's hard. Of course this feels uncomfortable for me right now. I often say getting into self-compassion, an easy way is to just start a sentence with the words of course. Like, of course, like I feel embarrassed right now. This is awkward, but like, okay, doesn't mean it's a judgment on my parenting.
And it's so true because, as an early mom, I used to feel a lot of judgment if I felt like my child wasn't doing what I thought they should do at that age, at that stage, in that place, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now I've got a few more years under my belt, a little bit more experience. But if that scenario were to happen to another mom at the grocery store where her toddler was having a meltdown and she was feeling uncomfortable, I would have so much compassion. And I often go out of my way to try to support or try to just, make a joke in the moment or lighten the mood or just be like, honestly, don't worry, like, and have so much compassion for other people.
Yeah,
And what you're saying is to mirror that, what you feel
yeah,
and give some to yourself because we all have been in
yeah,
stressful situations. But when we can be like, of course, we're going to feel like sweaty and like anxious and like,
yeah,
our breath. And then, maybe we get into the car and we get our toddler safely in his car seat and we're playing like wheels on the bus and we can like take a few breaths and be like, whew, I did it.
yeah,
It was tricky. And like, let's, we can take a pause there. Right. And I think when
yeah.
we can apply the compassion that we so readily have for everyone around us, when we can do that for ourselves, it makes everything feel a lot easier and it can allow some of that suffering to dissipate.
Yeah, and look at how readily, like when you were giving that example, look how much emotion came up for
Oh
you.
my
Like,
gosh, I was like
and right,
crying.
just yeah, like look at how like you became tearful in that moment, even just imagining um giving compassion to another mom because you have empathy, you can put yourself in her shoes. And so how easy it was for you to do that for someone else, but we don't do it for ourselves. So imagine if like we could meet ourselves in that moment, right? Of like, okay, yeah, like of course this is so hard for me. And I love that you said take a pause because that's the other thing I talk a lot about is it's really hard to do in the moment when you're having an anxious moment or an uncomfortable moment, but even to take a pause and be like, okay, what do I need right now? Like, okay, I might just need to say, you know what, people go ahead of me. Like, I just have to wait this out. Right?
Mhm.
Like, I need to take the pressure off. I need to just be like, let's just move to the side. Like, let's not force this. Or I need to ask for help. or I need to, I don't know, pause and take a breath before I pick my kid up off the floor. Right? But what do I need? But so insert a pause, self-compassion, curiosity over judgment. But the self-compassion piece, it's there, right? It's we have it so at the ready for other people. Like, look at how intensely it came up for you. Like, can we apply that to ourselves? It's there. We keep giving it away.
So good. I know we've really been talking about anxiety a lot, and something that is sort of connected to anxiety and may support reducing our anxiety levels that I think women really struggle with is assertiveness. And so I
Mhm.
really would love to pick your brain on assertiveness as a learned skill a little bit before we end this conversation, because I do feel that assertiveness is misunderstood. So can you define what assertiveness truly is and explain how it might differ from being either really aggressive, because many women feel that they don't want to assert themselves because they don't want to be seen as overly aggressive, as well as being passive. So what is assertiveness?
Yeah, so assertiveness is, just simply a style of communication where you are expressing yourself in a way that is respectful of yourself and respectful of the other person. Um, and so other styles of communication that are different and not on the same realm. So assertiveness is kind of its own thing. And then on another realm, there's kind of this continuum between like passive communication at one end and aggressive communication at the opposite end. And in the middle are ranges of passive aggressive communication. So assertiveness is not that. Assertiveness is, speaking in a more kind of clear and direct way. But the main thing about it is that you're being respectful of your needs and your boundaries and the other person's as well. Um, and it is something that can be learned. I think it's something that a lot of us were not taught, or wasn't modeled for us, but it's a skill that can be learned and practiced.
I had a mentor who would say that clear is kind. And the more clear you can be, the more kind you're going to be to the person you're communicating with, as well as to yourself, and to speak up for what you need in the moment really is the most kind thing that you can do for everyone involved. But we may feel that there are certain barriers to that, right? Like we may have low self-worth that might prevent us from actually saying and speaking up and even suggesting what it is that we might need. We might be fearful to express that. So we might just be really stressed, or like our anxiety might be coming up. So are there any
Yeah.
strategies that you can provide us with that can help us overcome these barriers, that can help foster a more assertive and healthier communication pattern?
Yeah, it takes practice, right? It really takes
Mm-hmm.
practice. So I think the first strategy is figuring out where kind of do you fall in your communication style, right? Like what's your starting point? So are you more passive where you're kind of like going along with people. You have these beliefs, right? That like it's not kind to speak up, right? You're kind of self-sacrificing. You defer to other people. Because there's beliefs that kind of go with each style, right? So, if you're more passive, you're kind of believing that, oh, being assertive means being selfish. Like that's not what assertive is. I would also say, like, I would also kind of want to take out the whole idea of being kind. Like, assertive is not, about being kind or not being kind. It's about being assertive. Right? When we start to put in these judgments like, oh, but like, am I being kind? Am I being nice? Right? Well, you're not being aggressive. You're being assertive. You're being like respectful. Um, so figure out your starting point. Like, are you more passive? Are you coming from a belief that like speaking up is bad in some way, right? Are you more passive aggressive where, a belief there might be, well, I shouldn't have to ask. Like, they should just know. They should just know what I want. If they really cared about me, they would just know. Okay, well, so that is not true. People can't read our minds. So you might have to do a little bit of work on your belief system, right? If you're aggressive, you're coming from a aggressive communication style. Your belief might be more about like if I am not aggressive, nothing will get done. Like I won't get what I want or what I need, right? Like nice guys finish last kind of thing. Um, right. So assertive beliefs are more like I get to make my choices and other people get to make theirs. I can ask for what I want and people can say no. I have my opinion, other people have theirs. I don't know everything. I don't have to. There's a little bit more leeway there. So I think starting figuring out where are you at and what are the beliefs that are keeping you there is one thing. And then, can you consider, like, are they working for you? Is that working for you? Are those beliefs working for you? Right. So if you're thinking, if I speak up for myself, that's selfish. Okay, but is that working for you? So, because if you're more passive, then probably other people are really getting a lot of what they need, and you're probably self-sacrificing a lot. Are you okay with that? Um, I guess if you're okay with it, you don't need to be more assertive, right? If you're not, can you consider that there's another alternative? So you don't have to go to the aggressive end. You don't have to go to passive aggressive. You can go to um, more assertive, which is a little bit safer, but still scary. And then the other thing that really needs to happen for somebody to move more into assertiveness is you need to be aware of, usually assertiveness involves asking for something that you need or saying no, like setting a boundary. So you need to kind of, again, take a pause, check in with yourself, like connect with yourself. Like, what do I need? What do I want? What am I not okay with? What am I okay with? So if you don't know, like if you're not connected to yourself and you don't know, like have kind of a guiding sense of what you need, you're not going to be assertive. If you're clear on it, like, yeah, I kind of need a break. So yeah, maybe I need to ask for help. Um, Nothing's going to happen unless you check in with yourself. Um, and then if you want to practice it, sometimes I talk to people about practicing in really benign situations, like low risk situations that you kind of invent. So, I would say to people, like, if you're going to get a coffee, you can practice just with a stranger, like at the coffee shop, like get your coffee and then maybe go back and say, oh, you know what? Like, oh, you know what? Can you just add a bit more milk, please? Or you know what? I think you got my order wrong. Can you adjust it? Or I changed my mind, right? So being like assertive in these just really easy ways, sometimes that's even really hard for people at the start. But kind of practicing in really safe, low risk situations is a start. And then building up to like, you might even make a hierarchy of like, who is the person that's the hardest for me to be assertive with? Who do I become my most passive self with, or my most passive aggressive self with, right? Or my most aggressive? Don't start with them, work up to them. Start with safer, more benign people who you're never going to see again.
It's so true. And I would just invite the listener too, because you've given so many really helpful questions and prompts that we can ask ourselves that will lead us to understanding more about ourselves and where we want to make changes or where we feel that we can grow or improve in certain ways, especially when it comes to our communication. And you really hit the nail on the head, because how many times have we or been with someone, we're at a restaurant and the wrong thing is placed in front of us and we'll just
Yeah,
eat it even though it wasn't what we ordered, when it can be
yeah,
really easy to just say, excuse me, you know what, I actually ordered this and this is not what I asked for. And 9.99 times out of 10, the person's just going to say, no problem, I'll get you that thing that you actually wanted.
yeah,
But we can feel like it's, just too much to ask for what it was that we initially needed.
right.
So I think it's really, really important that you say, like, this is low risk. But as we do become more assertive, maybe we're practicing at the coffee shop or in these low risk environments. Um, Sometimes we're encountering resistance from those who are used to our previous dynamic. So anything that
Hmm.
you can provide us with that can help us maintain our assertiveness and that communication while we're navigating, changing relationships or things, the change can feel really scary. Is there anything that
Yeah.
you can say to support us in those transitions?
Yeah. So so first of all, it's normal. So expect it, right? That if you are not, if you're starting to be more assertive in a relationship, even if you don't let the person in on that that's what you're doing, they're going to feel a difference and they're going to resist it because just naturally they're used to the dynamic, right? Especially if you are in a dynamic where you're more passive. Well, that person probably really likes that dynamic,
Mhm.
and you might have even attracted that person based on that dynamic, right? Because they can get a lot from you, and you are tolerating a lot or self-sacrificing a lot. So I would say if it's if it's a safe person, like somebody that you feel safe with, you might even be transparent, right? Like, hey, like communicate with them. Like, you know what? Like, I feel like I need to, like, I'm trying to just be more assertive because I feel like um, a lot of my needs are not getting met, and I want to work on that. Or like, I'm not having enough boundaries, and I'm trying to work on that. So, yeah, you might notice that I sound a bit different, right? If it's a safe person. If it's not, and sometimes we need to apply assertiveness in relationships that are challenging. And sometimes we need to learn to be assertive to protect ourselves in relationships that, where the person's really challenging or emotionally abusive. And that person, we're not going to tell them that, but we're just going to do it. And in those cases, you can use a technique called broken record, where you're just kind of saying the same thing. So, like, sometimes what will happen is when you start to be assertive, people will challenge you, right? Like, you're saying, I need to communicate by email instead of talking to you on the phone, right? So now I'm going to do that from now on. And they might say, like, well, why? And like they might come up with all these reasons because it works for them to talk to you on the phone because then they can manipulate you and then they can say all these things. And you might be like, nope, I'm just going to communicate by email. And then they maybe come back at you again. No, but like they're basically saying, in other words, I don't like this dynamic change. I'm resisting it. And you just kind of keep saying the same thing. Like, as I said, like, I'm just going to be communicating to you by email. So when you start to be more assertive and set your boundary or ask for what you need, you don't always need to give a big rationale for it. If it's a person that's not going to be understanding or isn't really safe, you just need to kind of assert it and kind of keep saying the thing, like same thing, like make it boring. Just keep saying the same thing over and over, and then do the new thing. So it can feel weird, but eventually it kind of gets boring for them to keep trying to resist it.
That's so good. And I think too, like you're saying, like a broken record, eventually that person's going to not want to listen to the broken record anymore, right? So they're going
Yeah.
to, either, respect that boundary that you've said or whatever it is that you've asserted, or they're going to go away. And I think either one is a win, right? So that
Hmm.
can be really, really helpful. Um, Dr. Laderoute, I'm so grateful that we had this conversation. I think that, we've really just kind of skimmed the surface and there's so much
Yeah.
more that we can talk about. And I'd love to have you
Yeah.
back to continue this conversation. But in the meantime, where can the listener learn more from you? Where can we find you? And if we do want to work with you, how can that happen?
Yeah. So if you want to find me and inquire about working with me, the best place is to go to my website, drchristineladeroute.com. And you can also find me at loomwomenshealth.com, or on Instagram at Dr. Kristine Laderoute, I think it is. Yeah.
This is beautiful. Well, really, really appreciate this time that we spent together. And I will put those links in the notes for the podcast episode. And I can't wait to continue this conversation some more. But until
Thank you
then,
so
thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you. This has been really enriching. And you're right, we're just skimming the surface. So I'd love to talk more.
Well, I'm so glad that you tuned in for this just beautiful and insightful conversation with Dr. Kristine Laderoute. I hope you're walking away with not just a better understanding, but a lot more compassion for yourself, how your body is responding, and just for your own personal growth. Here are a few key takeaways that I am leaving with from today's episode. Number one, anxiety is information. It's not a flaw, it's our body's way of signaling deeper emotional truths that we can uncover. Number two, assertiveness is a skill, not a personality trait, and it can be learned with intention and practice. I love those examples that Kristine provided. Number three, emotional suppression adds pressure, but reconnecting with our feelings can support us in releasing it. Number four, your nervous system matters, but what feels like danger may just be discomfort. So don't forget to ask yourself those questions. And most importantly, you can grow, you can heal, and you can stay connected to your needs, even in messy real life. We talked a lot about toddler tantrums, and I just feel like it's the perfect analogy. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend. Can you please leave me a rating, write me a review in Apple Podcasts, help spread the word and let other people know that anxiety and assertiveness are just beautiful, interconnected topics that we need to discuss. And if you can, throw this on your Instagram, put it in your stories. Let me know you're listening. Tag me. I would love to see that so I can cheer you on as well. You can also find links in the notes for this podcast episode to connect with Dr. Laderoute and see what she's up to, as well as what the folks at Loom Women Plus Health are doing, which is just so incredible. You can also find links for the free 30 Days for Me guide, as well as the Juggle is Real Authentic Self-Care Planner. And there is a free summer visual charts in there as well that's going to be so great for you when you're home this summer. Until the next time, thank you so much for listening. I'm so grateful for you. Take good care.